Hey guys, so I come to you for part 2 of my extensive and comprehensive bookshelf tour. So we continue with the... Oh, I want to start this video, I want to start every bookshelf tour video from here on out by saying that if there is any book here that I don't talk about very much, that you want to talk to me about more, then feel free to leave a comment. And of course, as always, if you have a comment on anything that I show or talk about, then just feel free to comment, and I'm happy to have a little discussion with you. So, anyway, we start with another Czech novel. This is Saturnin by Zdeněk Jirotka. Zdeněk Jirotka is just about the Czech name to end all Czech names, I will say. And then we progress into my small collection of the works of James Joyce. This is a Barnes & Noble Classic Edition bind-up of Dubliners and a portrait of the artist as a young man, which is really helpful because it explains certain cultural and historical aspects of the setting of Ireland when those books take place. That's really helpful for someone who, didn't grow up in that time. And then we have a really, really nice Easton Press edition of a portrait of the artist as a young man. It has like gold edges. It has a built-in bookmark somewhere in here. It's really a lovely thing. Then we have my 2 copies of Ulysses. You may be wondering why I have 2 copies of Ulysses, but the first one is the one that I read. This is my vintage classics edition, which really has a striking cover design, I think. You can see that the Y, E, and S are black, whereas the rest of the title is white, which sort of forms the word yes, as the iconic last line. Those who have read the novel will know why the word yes is significant. But so this is what I read. This is the one that I sort of underlined. I have dog-eared and everything. The second copy of Ulysses that I have is this old Modern Library hardcover, and this is one that I would never read from, just because it's kind of old, but also it has a lot of sentimental value. I got it from my grandpa when he was emptying out his library for when he was moving into a nursing home. You're going to see several books like that, but so it also has his notes. Maybe you can see some of that. Yeah, it has like his notes all over. It has underlining annotation from him. So yeah, that's mostly I keep as a sentimental memento. And then with this we have my next big hurdle with reading Joyce. This is Finnegan's Wake, a Penguin modern classic with an introduction by John Bishop. And next to that we have the annotations to Finnegan's Wake by Roland McHugh, which I keep next to Finnegan's Wake just because it's literally annotations on the novel, even though the book itself is technically non-fiction. Then we have The Metamorphosis and Other Stories by Franz Kafka, The Last Temptation of Christ by Nikos Kazantzakis. Then we have 3 novels by Danilo Kish, who is a very interesting Serbo-Croat writer, or was a very interesting Serbo-Croat writer. He's dead now. He died quite young. But the first one I have here is Garden Ashes, an early World War II novel that is the only one that I haven't read. Next one is Psalm 44, which is a novel that takes place in a concentration camp and is incredibly powerful. And then A Tomb for Boris Davidovich, which is more of a collection of short stories that all take place in the sort of totalitarian regimes in communist countries mostly, and deal with sort of betrayal and surveillance and all these sorts of things. It has some reminiscences to 1984, but is a bit more sophisticated than 1984, although I do love 1984. Then we have Love and Garbage by Ivan Klima, yet another Czech novel. This is about a man who spends his days cleaning up the streets of Prague. In Prague you can make some extra money by cleaning up the streets. It's good for like homeless people and students who need extra money. But he basically does it for a living, and really it is just kind of a meditative, contemplative novel about Franz Kafka and his relationship with this woman and the death of his father. And it was really, really good, but I actually didn't manage to finish it. So at some point I really do need to finish it because I was liking it quite a bit. Then we move on into my 3 novels by D.H. Lawrence. This is Lady Chatterley's Lover, which is probably his most accessible novel, and probably my favorite. I think it says some really interesting things about the modern world. The next one is Sons and Lovers, which is probably his most well-written novel that I have read, although it's probably the one that resonated with me the least. I just didn't really get much out of it, I didn't feel. And then we have Women in Love, which is one of his longer, more enigmatic works, which I really need to reread, because it is just very, it's not an easy novel, and it's very strange, and, yeah, so I need to reread it, which is going to be a mantra in this library tour, that I really need to reread a lot of these books. And we have The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. And we find our way now to a bunch of Thomas Mann, so prepare yourselves. This is Buddenbrooks, Death in Venice, and 7 Other Stories. I thought the writing in Death in Venice was brilliant, but I didn't quite know what to make of the story. Dr. Faustus, which I'm really excited to read. Probably of all the Thomas Mann I own, that's the one I'm most excited to read, because it's about a composer, and I love stories about artists and such. And it has a lot about music, and especially classical music, which I think I'll really, really enjoy. And then finally we have Joseph and His Brothers, which you could probably kill someone with. Next up we have 2 novels that are all the rage on BookTube right now. This is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, and then we have Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. Yeah, I like these books a lot. I don't love them in the way that a lot of other people seem to. I feel like a lot of people talk about them like they are the second coming of Jesus Christ, and I don't know, I like them, but I feel like they're well-written, compelling historical fiction, and that is all that I see them as, not as this, like, monument or pinnacle of literature, I don't know, but I do probably need to reread them. Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Blue is the Warmest Color by Julie Moreau, which is notable for being the only graphic novel on my shelf. A Constellation of Vital Phenomena by Anthony Mara. Matterhorn by Carl Merlantes. And now we come to a bunch of Cormac McCarthy, so do prepare yourselves. This is All the Pretty Horses, which I enjoyed, but found ultimately kind of forgettable. This is Cities of the Plain. The Crossing, which I'm particularly interested in because I've heard that a traveling opera company appears in it, and I kind of like that idea. And then we have Blood Meridian, which is probably the Cormac McCarthy novel that struck me the least when I first read it. I found it kind of pretentious and probably a bit overrated, but now it is the Cormac McCarthy book that sort of sticks with me the most. I think it does explore some really compelling themes about America and what America is. And I do think back to the writing, too. The writing is very Baroque and extravagant, and I think when I first read it, I thought that was sort of pretentious, but now I think maybe there was a purpose to it that I was missing, so I need to reread that one. And then we're not quite done with McCarthy. We have Suttree, and we have The Road, his Pulitzer Prize-winning novel that I adore. Moving on to Atonement by Ian McEwan. Dead Man's Walk, the first book chronologically in the Lonesome Dove series by Larry McMurtry. Comanche Moon by Larry McMurtry. Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, his Pulitzer Prize-winning novel that I absolutely love. What's very interesting is that this book is like a classic Western novel, and it was actually published the same year as Blood Meridian, which I think is fascinating. Because they're both sort of Westerns, and they both sort of try to explore the darker side of the American West, in contrast to the sort of romanticized view of the American West that we see in many, like, Western films. And yet they do so differently and in such a different style, and I just think that's fascinating. Fascinating. And finally we have The Streets of Laredo by Larry McMurtry. Another titan of American letters, this is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. The sentence-making in this novel is just absolutely incredible. I love it. I do need to reread it because I did rush through it this year, and I do hope to reread it this year. Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, which I did quite like, but it is probably a case where I prefer the movie to the book. And we have the first 2 books in Naomi Novik's Temeraire series. This is His Majesty's Dragon and Throne of Jade. Master and Commander by Patrick O'Brien. Great Escapes from Detroit by Joseph O'Malley. Joseph O'Malley is the pen name of Booktube's own Two-Tight-Lautrec. At Swim Two Boys by Jamie O'Neill. 1984 by George Orwell, which I think absolutely deserves the hype that it gets, not only for its relevance to the modern world, which I think sort of speaks for itself, but also just as like an entertaining work of fiction. Honestly, I was thoroughly engrossed by it when I read it. I still remember how I felt at the end. It really is great, I think. And then the next three books are all about the Prague Golem, which is this Czech Jewish legend about this sort of what's supposed to be a sort of kind of grotesque creature who comes to life out of a statue. And these three books, this one here is The Legend of the Golem by Ivana Pechachkova, which is kind of a more of a novel. These other two, this one doesn't really credit an author, but this is The Prague Golem, Jewish Stories of the Ghetto, and this is The Golem from the Old Prague by Eduard Petishka. They're okay. None of them I would highly recommend as like great reading experiences, but I guess if you're interested in sort of weird old legends like that, maybe you'll find interest in them. The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, which I still think to very often. I think the writing is brilliant. Close Range by Annie Proulx, which is the short story collection that contains Brokeback Mountain, which is one of my absolute favorite short stories ever, and the movie that is based on it is one of my favorite movies ever. That Old Ace in the Hole by Annie Proulx. This is a box set of the first 4 books in Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. I have this here basically for the same reason that I have World War Z, because just basically for a rainy day, if ever I find myself going through some intense times where I'm very busy or very preoccupied, and I just need something that's relatively easy to read, even if it is kind of, horror. Then we have all 4 of Marilynne Robinson's novels. So this is Housekeeping, which has some of the greatest sentences I've ever read. I just absolutely love it, and it really nearly brought me to tears. Then we, of course, have her Gilead trilogy. And I love all these, but Home would be my pick for my favorite just because of its emotional punch. The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Now we have 3 novels by James Salter. This is All That Is, The Hunters, and Light Years. And we round out this bookcase with another Easton Press edition, this time of Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. So that is the first bookcase of fiction, so I hope you all enjoyed. I will return for part 3, where we will be doing, we will be finishing up the fiction and beginning with the drama. So look out for that. Bye, guys.